You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the Interactive Interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com. Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. Joining us on the Newsmaker line is the director of a new feature documentary, which will be debuting on Fuse in November. It is called Out in the Ring. He is Ry Levey. Are you with me, sir?
I am. Great to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and I am excited to see this documentary. It's definitely an interesting one for me. I am a heterosexual guy, but I have been following professional wrestling literally my entire life and reporting on it for over 20 years. So it's definitely a subject that, especially in modern times, needs to be talked about. What made you decide this was the time to put together this documentary?
Well, one of the things as a storyteller and filmmaker, is I'm always looking for stories around hidden histories, and primarily as they relate to myself as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, finding people in spaces where we've been told we're not welcome, or where there's potential for a hidden history. Like, if you don't see yourself represented, you have to wonder who and where, because we know that we're everywhere. And wrestling just made sense growing up in the 80s on a diet of Calgary Stampede Wrestling, and through the 80s and into AWA and WWE, WCW, and beyond. I wasn't seeing myself represented. And when the time came to tell a first story, it made sense to go back to a place of that I had a familiarity with in childhood, and something that I had a deep affection for, and go, where are we? And who was there? And what is the hidden history of queer representation in professional wrestling? And that's what led me to kind of start doing the research to find out who was there and what was around, and then subsequently find out pro wrestlers that were willing to speak, and those that were not just out, but not rumored to be out.
Right.
Because so many come out since. And we'd obviously heard that Pat Patterson was gay, but Pat had never said it publicly. It wasn't until a few historians, like people like Greg Oliver, would interview Sandy Parker, and then that story. But a lot of people didn't find that story because, again, Sandy Parker was not considered a quote-unquote major star, because she was of an era in the territory system where you were working only in regional areas. So she wasn't highlighted in that, big global boom of national wrestling that came when Vince McMahon expanded his father's company in the 1980s.
Absolutely. You mentioned Pat Patterson, and it just made me remember they did that Legends House show on the WWE network, and they did a big reveal that he was gay. And when they did it, I remember sitting at home and I was thinking, did anybody not know? And did it still have the impact that it did? Because, as a guy growing up, when Ellen did it on the Ellen DeGeneres show, it was a big cultural event. But when Pat Patterson did it, it's like we kind of already knew, and it doesn't really change anything that we think about you. You're still one of the greatest minds in wrestling. So do you think that was just a case of society catching up to acceptance?
No, I think it was actually a very significant moment for Pat. In talking to Bertrand Hébert, and the reason Pat himself, even though he was alive when we were producing the film and I was directing, his health was declining, his memory was declining, years of head injuries and issues around dementia and memory loss. And of course, we know that Pat was also dealing with other health issues. Bertrand Hébert his biographer became kind of his spokesperson in a way, was the one person that spent the most time with him. And the truth is Pat had never once publicly said the words, "I'm gay." Right. Everybody knew, everybody knows. It's the term in my documentary a lot of people use is hiding in plain sight. He never even in the book accepted that he wrote with Bertrand Hébert said, my partner, my lover, my husband. He referred to Louis Dondero, his life partner, as his friend.
Mm.
And he never once publicly uttered the words, "I'm gay," out loud on media in that moment. That's why the power was there, is they saw a huge weight lifting off of Pat. Everybody knew, everybody loved Louis, everybody loved Pat. And there's all this weird ambiguity that comes with, again, not speaking your truth publicly and hiding in plain sight. And Pat's story is such that he set himself up to be the biggest target for every homophobe, every blackmailer, every person who wanted to get ahead, because he wasn't out and he wasn't comfortable. He came from a generation where you didn't speak your truth publicly. And he came from a very macho, industry. And while everybody knew backstage, publicly, Pat was not out. And that made him a very easy target. And still to this day is reason why there's always lingering rumors. Pat Patterson's a pedophile. Pat Patterson, Pat Patterson had affairs with wrestlers. He blackmailed them. We now know, and I had to spend a significant amount of time making sure that if I was going to hold him up to the light, as an icon, that the people around him, the majority of people, and there was always going to be people who were going to take advantage of it. Those majority of people would back him up and say, Pat was of an era. Everybody was making jokes. It was a time of stuff. Was everybody, the same way a straight male wrestler might make a joke about, the guys ribbing. We know this kind of history of, kidding around. And again, we know that we don't do that. We don't behave those ways anymore. Times change and things.
Right.
We don't do things. But Pat was a victim of the closet still, because it was easy for somebody like Murray Hodgson, who we now know was a con man because the case was thrown out. It's documented in the files, that he had blackmailed other gay men, and he fired his attorney when he found out he was gay. It's all on record in the case of it, and it's why he went away. It's why Murray Hodgson went off, and he's only just in the last 5 years popped up strangely as, and you'll love this, he promotes drag shows with RuPaul's Drag Race drag queens. So
the
Murray
worm has turned on that one, yes.
Yeah, he's basically still in the wrestling business in a way, because wrestling and drag are basically the same thing. And he's still playing some of his, there's still complaints about stuff of him, not doing untoward things towards performers, not, in terms of payment stuff that are out there. I mean, I can't verify those, but there's certainly, it does, basically, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. And but Pat left himself open, and that's an unfortunate thing. And I think watching that made other performers either stay back in the closet or realize that they had better come out and be the best they could be, and in terms of living their truth and life and stopping people from taking advantage of us.
Absolutely. There's this TV show called Futurama. They do like parodies of wrestling on a couple episodes, and one of them is of the Foreigner, and the Foreigner just says, "I'm not from here," and that makes him a bad guy inherently. And that's kind of the way, in a lot of ways, that homosexual wrestlers or playing a gay character was perceived by the audience as well. It made them uncomfortable, and it was presented as, these are the bad guys, you want to boo them. As somebody who is of the LGBTQ community, as you are, is that partially what kept you maybe at arm's length from wrestling a little bit, and maybe made you feel like you weren't represented on that show?
Well, I certainly, wasn't represented. However, in hindsight, hindsight's always 2020. I think of the wrestlers that I was drawn to, and Pollo Del Mar who has become who's an amazing journalist and now become a wrestling personality in their own right.
In fact, I just interviewed Thrillbilly, who she manages. So that's pretty cool. Yes.
Very cool, man. Very cool guy. And for him to step into the storyline with Pollo in kind of a romantic way is so transgressive, considering it's an NWA Southern, promotion that has known for being more conservative. It's so interesting to see that fan base and her thriving in it. But we spoke about, at length, the characters and the people that drew us. And Pollo, I met Pollo through an interview she had done with another podcaster when Austin Idol had his podcast briefly. Mm-hmm. And Pollo had written a piece for the Huffington Post about how wrestling was an important part of their coming up process. And that the first wrestler that they'd ever seen on TV that really caught their attention was Austin Idol because of the glitter, the sparkle, the flamboyance, that component. Not ostensibly queer, but there was something there in terms of that camp and that flamboyance. And I look back on the wrestlers that I think most fondly of in Calgary, and it ends up being that the two wrestlers that I think the most fondly of are Rip Rogers and Goldie Rogers, and Rip specifically was one of those wrestlers that had a gimmick, not as as leather driven or makeup driven as an Adrian Street in that era, but comes of that era, and they teamed together in the territories. But again, pigtails, pink, flamboyance, the coward, the heel, and I look back now and go, wow, I have to wonder, is that because that was the closest I was going to get to see who I was represented? Was that there? And again, as Pollo has said, when you're hungry and you're unseen, you'll take anything you can get that comes as close to who you are. You're holding on basically to try to find a way until something clicks, until something is actually representative of you. I mean, it can be said, you hear this said by people who are part of the Black community in terms of seeing African American or African Canadian representation in North America or beyond on television. You're looking for Asian representation. I mean, you're looking to see yourself represented. And in wrestling, because it's always had a very conservative component to it, that's rooted out of a lot of Southern American, ultra-conservative Republican spaces, the villain was gay. And with the exception of somebody like an Adrian Street, who was an exception to the rule, because the reason he could be that character is that he knew he could probably he was a bare-knuckled brawler. He could beat anybody up if they really wanted to. He could back it up.
Oh, yes.
So that was different. At the same side of the coin, on the other side of the coin, I mean, we've got Chris Colt, who is basically doing a very similar thing ahead of Adrian Street and was out his entire career. There was no hiding in plain sight like Pat or like, and other performers like Tex Green and Sandy Parker, the women in the 70s, because Chris was never in the closet. And it's amazing, as everybody talks about what a great performer he was and how great he was to work with, and just, ring psychology, physical. But the difference being is that the industry didn't want somebody who was actually the real deal. They don't know how to deal with us, but they know how to deal with a character. And if you push it to the end, you'll get there. And, I mean, we've had, and again, there's been so few people that could have been an ally in a way, journalistically at that period of time within the industry, that was going to take that chance and go to bat.
Right.
And we really have so few people. We had so few people then. So anything was just an opportunity to see yourself. And just that little bit is enough in some cases for us to take those next steps and hold on.
I'm shuffling two questions in my mind, which one I want to go with first. The first one I'm going to go with is going to be about Chris Kanyon. Chris Kanyon was a guy that I would consider a acquaintance of mine. We were kind of friendly. I got many a MySpace message from him in the middle of the night talking about matches he had on WCW Saturday Night, 10 years prior. And it was pretty cool because he knew I knew, and he knew I knew about all his history. And I knew he was gay, and he was treated horribly. If you saw the Dark Side of the Ring episode where they talk about when he came out and the abuse that he took, there were other issues with Chris, bipolar disorder and things like that. But do you kind of look at Chris Kanyon and the way that he was treated, the violent way he was treated, and ultimately blackballed, as maybe the last of a generation, maybe the last of something like that as we head into a more accepting 21st century?
Yeah, Chris, it was talking to wrestlers like Scott McEwen. It was an out indie wrestler, territory guy, trained out of Minnesota. With those instant messenger things and web, and web messaging and that was Chris' lifeline, was that ability to find people within those spaces. And, he kept everything very close to his chest. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that violent, vicious storyline. I mean, I think some people instantly go, yeah, it's wrestling, it's whatever. No, let's clarify this. Wrestling is not fake. Wrestling is predetermined. It's choreographed. You're simulating combat. And at that point in the 90s, and those in the know, and and I tell people this, when you're hit with a chair, you're hit with a chair.
Right.
Taking it, you're preparing for that. You're preparing for that to an extent. And when Chris was dressed as Boy George, put in a closet in the middle of the ring, and the Undertaker was instructed to beat him, and you watch that, you hear it hitting, you hear that chair hitting. I don't care how many times you tell me that chair is gimmick. It's made out of thinner metal. Listen, anytime I've been hit with something hard, it don't tickle. And when you got a 6'10", 300-pound guy beating the heck out of you because he's been instructed essentially to do that, it was a message to Chris. We know that, and he knows it too, because he went on Howard Stern and said as much. And when I spoke to Pollo Del Mar about it in the film, we addressed it. And Chris was abandoned at a time because I don't think they were ready. They were hanging on. Listen, when you're losing a battle, we see this politically, you up your ante. You come at it in the most aggressive, vile, terrible ways. You do everything to try to cling because you're going to lose this fight. Hate does not win in this thing. Love ultimately rules and wins. And Chris just missed that opportunity. And obviously the mental health issues that come with it. I love Jason Eisner and Evan Husney, who make Dark Side of the Ring. I've known both those guys for a long time. I'm a big fan of what they've done for the space. I will admit that I am hypercritical of the Chris Kanyon episode because if you notice it, there are no women, there are no people of color, and there are no queer people to discuss Chris's story and that whole story. And you cannot tell Chris's story without the involvement of people who were impacted by his legacy. That's fine. You want to talk to James and you want to talk to people that knew him and loved him. But not one person thought to ask Mike Perro or Sonny Kiss or Effie or Sonia Deville or people who have since come out about what it was like to see him and have him come out and comment on it. As Mike Perro said, Chris knew that he was loved but the monster got him. And Mike Perro is a great parallel to that because he dodged that same bullet. He was there. He was there in those depths of depression and suicide and self-loathing. And it's tough. I mean, Chris's story is a tragic tale, and just the same as Joni Lauer, China's story is. They both, hopefully, in their death and this great loss, and we feel that loss to this day because we know how loved and talented they were. That their legacy will be that they were brave, and that Chris specifically was brave enough to take that step and say who he was and live his truth. And you have to wonder, and I think we all wonder because we know what a wonderful man he was.
Absolutely.
And that I like to think that if Chris Kanyon had made it through and the demons hadn't gotten him, that he would have had a lovely career. He'd be working as a trainer today, and he'd be able to live in his truth and find love. And that I can only imagine watching that there are now hundreds of out wrestlers and promotions and opportunities for people that he would have been able to flourish.
You mentioned some of the out wrestlers that are out there now. Sonny Kiss being one, Nyla Rose being a transgender wrestler. How accommodating was the industry, the companies such as AEW and WWE, towards your film?
Well, they have no involvement. Large corporations, by any whether it's McDonald's to WWE or any of them, are resistant to giving footage to people anyway. And this is commonplace in documentary. And economically, they make it difficult for documentary filmmakers to do that. They're hypersensitive to any sort of critical analysis of what they've done in the past, specifically a company like WWE. And economically, they're always, they make things, they guard things. What we do benefit from as documentary artists is something called fair use in the United States, the fair use dealing law. And that's what I utilized. I lawyered up very well with a very good attorney, and we did an extensive clearance analysis of what we could utilize image-wise, content-wise, and ran everything to the letter of the law. And had to do it that way because we knew WWE was not going to hand me clips if I was going to criticize the beating on TV of an openly gay man. If I wanted to use the Mark Henry China footage of the trans panic thing, which is not in the film but exists, or the Billy and Chuck angle, and I want to be hypercritical of Goldust, there's no way they're going to let that happen. They're already scrubbing anything dubious from their legacy. They're removing, the Bad News Brown versus Roddy Piper match from
WrestleMania 6, right?
WrestleMania 6, and I was there as a kid. And because he's painted half black and half white, I mean, it's a horribly racist, vile thing. And they're embarrassed by it, and as they should be, or DX and blackface. And this was in the bloody 90s. I mean, we're talking, this is a time when we're well past Jim Crow. We're well past, minstreling. We're going to do blackface.
Oh boy.
Really? Are we going to do this?
Do you have time for just a couple more questions?
Absolutely, I do.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you something, and I saved it for later in the interview in case it upsets you. You mentioned conservative Republicans, of which I am one. And for somebody like me who is a conservative, a staunch conservative, as a matter of fact, like I told you earlier, I'm looking forward to seeing this documentary when it airs. What could somebody like me benefit from seeing in your film? What could we learn about, your guys' struggle And what can we basically take away from it as somebody who maybe is of a different political viewpoint?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you want to have this discussion because I think it's important. And I've never been, and there's a difference. You're having a rational discourse, and I think we'd like to also kind of highlight the fact that the Republican Party, as we know it, or the conservative parties as we know it right now, are not the party that of many people that I know of. It's different. I mean, this is a highly weaponized, hyper nationalist movement that's invading this. This is a different space. And what I want my film to do, and I wanted it to do to everybody, is to understand that even though I was using the lens of professional wrestling, that humans are humans, and stories of human struggle and strife and understanding are universal, whether we're conservative, liberal, gay, straight, trans, non-binary, black, white, Muslim. We're seeing it in this world. And I say this is I'm in the middle of a film that looks at LGBTQ representation in Christian music. And I just was at the Dove Awards with a drag queen Christian music artist and a gender nonconforming Christian music artist. And we attended as a group of 30 people to take space. And one of the things that terrified us at one point was the use of Christian nationalist language, and the words weapon were used in terms of ways to protect and promote the space. And I think we need to get to a point where we have to stop using words of violence, words of hatred, words of dissent, and try to get back to the understanding of what drives everything in these spaces is humanity and honesty and truth. And I think that when you hear stories of Mike Pero overcoming conversion therapy, or Dark Sheik discussing her transition as an Iranian person, and coming to the terms of that I think once we all break it down, we understand that we're all human, and that we just need to get back to understanding that we all deserve a right to live our truth in our space. And if we're not hurting anybody and harming anybody and living our lives, we're all the same. We're all, listen, we just want to be as boring as straight people. We just want to wash our dishes. We just want to we want marriage. Why did we want marriage equality? Well, because people were going to the hospitals and they weren't allowed in to say goodbye to their partners.
Right.
Because you have this thing. Ultimately, we just want to be boring like you, but we also want to be able to do whatever we want to do that we love. And do it to the best of our abilities and those opportunities. And we want to see, and we want future generations to love and live that way. And that's what I kind of hope, is that you'll find that humanity in these people that maybe you have differences with, and that we can all come together and, we can agree to disagree on many things, but we'll ultimately find that space.
Everybody's got a right to be. Absolutely. I agree with that entirely. All right. Well, final question, and it kind of is a little bit of a softball, but the documentary is going to be debuting in November on Fuse, and that is huge because you're going to get a whole lot of new eyeballs to see your documentary now as it airs on television. What made Fuse the right partner for this, and also how big is it for you as a filmmaker to clear, national television?
It's important to do that. It's a great opportunity to expand the vision for those people and those performers. And Fuse was the right partner because they came to the table with the enthusiasm. They wanted to be part of this. They have an agenda to support diversity and inclusion and acceptance and love. And that alone makes them the perfect partner. And they're willing to put in the sweat equity and the work to get it out there. And, I'm happy to partner with somebody who wants to see this film succeed. And that's ultimately all you can ask for as a filmmaker is somebody wanting to see your work succeed.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this with me. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this documentary has to say. And, from a wrestling historian perspective, you go all the way back to, Gorgeous George Wagner, which pushed the buttons, all the way to the sunny kisses of modern and as you said, Sonya Deville and so forth. So it's a very interesting perspective, a definitely interesting look. And I'm looking forward to it. I hope everybody tunes in. I will definitely have the dates and the availability for people to check this out on Fuse when it airs in November.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hey, before I let you go, do you mind if I ask for one little favor from you?
Sure.
I'm going to ask for a station ID from you, if you don't mind. Do you mind saying this is Rye Levey, and you're listening to the Wrestling Epicenter?
Yeah. I'm Rye Levey, director of Out in the Ring, and you are listening to the Wrestling Epicenter.
Perfect. I thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me.
Thanks, James. Appreciated it.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
This is Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Oh, Rush.
Featuring the interactive interview.
Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Oh, yeah.
Formerly The Blaze.
The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze rock.
Yo, Maniacs, so what you gonna do when the Blaze of Mania runs wild on you?
On WrestlingEpicenter.com.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling
Epicenter. Wrestling
Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter. The Wrestling Epicenter. Don't get off.
And now we shamelessly name drop from our history.
The Wrestling Epicenter would like to apologize for the following.
All right, everybody. Viva la raza. Viva la raza.
Hey, y'all.
Hello, ladies.
Hey, guys. We had a lovely conversation. First lady. Absolutely. Oh, look at me. She's so kooky.
Be there. Where else?
Interactive Wrestling Radio. Wrestling
Epicenter.
Oh, my God. You win. Wow, being interactive.
Whoa. Listen. I was not shooting. Yeah. I almost missed my fan. Breaking neck. I got 2 words for you. I've heard a lot about you guys. Let's go. I see my language. You're going to go to the shop. Some of them know. No nerves. That was great. It's going to be cool. Woo. What it's all about. The purest point of view. The living legend. Champion. Arrogant.
You're listening to me.
Instead of statement, I'm talking to you.
You're so lonely without you.
In the land of extreme.
Testify. Nevermore. Interactive interview. I'm not just the best. Interactive interview with a plastic
You
head.
earned the right.
Nobody. You better keep listening. Thank you very much. Controversy creates cash. Professional wrestling.
Made in the USA, baby.
Memphis wrestling. The guy on fire.
We were sexy.
What a show.
The one and only.
Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Wrestling
Epicenter. Interactive interview. We took care of the business. This isn't ballet. We are huge. You're where it's at. You gotta recognize who's the best. Make sure to tune in each and every week. I'll come out of your computer. Knock down your door and turn it on for you. Or else I'm gonna kick your stinking teeth in. And that's the bottom line.
Have a nice day.
It's showtime!
Don't forget to like and subscribe.